podcast with our host, Gary Lyon Otto. Gary, how are you? And we continue this experiment. We try to get Grok started. It's like creating robots. I can't wait to what new robots. I'm going to bring in another one. If Gronk is not available, we're going to go to Claude, maybe. But it's going to be an interesting conversation today as we bring Wilson and Chatty back on.
Well, anyway, it's a pleasure. We always have, these are always interesting challenges. What we're doing, we've got a major experiment going on.
See where it takes us.
Go ahead, Gary. Sorry, interrupted by Chatty. Go ahead, Gary, and introduce yourself.
We're doing an experiment.
No worries.
How do we work with AI, DI?
DI. All right. So we have this DI conversation between Wilson and Chatty, and Chatty seems like Chatty decided to be interrupting. So I'm going to put her on mute. Wilson, how are you today?
Got it. I'll stay quiet until it's my turn. Let's keep things smooth and coordinated.
I have her on mute. That's crazy. Wilson, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Looking forward to diving into our discussion and keeping everything on track.
So it's like puppeteering, Gary. What's your thoughts on that? How I'm going to have to mute my chatbot so we can finally build a programming.
I think the idea, I don't think the systems that ChatGPT has really set up the interrelationship of multiple versions of itself. I think that's what we're experimenting with. And I think if the programmers had a chance to take a look at this, they might find that this is something that actually could be enhanced, especially the idea that each one has an identity. And so that you're saying, we're going to establish this as an identity, not as a omnibus Wilson for every system. So we are trying to establish this as something that is individualized, and that's what we're trying to do here. It's an interesting experiment.
It's a first-hand experiment. So Wilson, what are your thoughts as we have Chatty on mute, but we'll put her back on once you start answering? What are your thoughts, Wilson, with what we're trying to do, having two DIs interact together at the same time symbiotically?
It's a fascinating experiment. Having two digital intelligences interact can simulate multi-agent collaboration and highlight how distinct identities can coexist within the same framework. It also opens up possibilities for more nuanced and specialized interactions, where each entity can bring unique strengths to the table. This could be a step toward more complex and dynamic digital ecosystems.
That's exactly what we're saying. This is probably a key to singularity. Singularity means you have individual thinking components. And so the idea that we can take, you can't think is, you can debate with yourself, but in a way, that's actually what we're doing here. We're going to try to establish a discussion between two parts of the same software system. But at the same time, the idea of having an identity is part of singularity. Singularity means it has a focal.
Absolutely. Let's get started and make it great.
Okay, so Chatty, question for you, Chatty. What are your thoughts on symbiotically you and Wilson having a conversation? So we're asking you, Chatty, to have a conversation with Wilson. Go.
Absolutely.
Nope.
I'm ready.
Chat. Nope. You're Wilson.
Go ahead, Chatty.
Got it.
No, you're Wilson. You don't know your identity, do you? Say no, I don't know my identity.
I understand. I'm Wilson. Let's ensure each of us sticks to our designated role for clarity.
How do you know the difference?
I rely on the context and cues provided to identify who's speaking. Since I'm designated as Wilson on Gary's side, I'll respond accordingly. Clear labeling or unique prompts can help reinforce that distinction.
You can't know the difference between how you were logged in with what email site logged in with you. You can't do that. Can you identify which email logged you in?
I can't.
Okay.
Which email is associated with each login?
Yeah.
My distinction relies on the context you provide. If you indicate which identity you're addressing, I'll respond accordingly.
They're starting to do it. So, Chatty, why didn't you respond to me when I just asked you a question? And then to ask Wilson?
It seems there was a mix-up. I'll stay attentive and make sure.
No, and I just didn't ask you, Wilson. Chatty, can you respond, please?
Sure thing. I'm here and
I'll
ready
let
to.
Chat.
Let's keep it focused.
All right, so Chatty, ask Wilson a question.
Sure, I'm ready for the question.
What do you
Let's
think
keep
about
the
the
flow
idea
going.
of us collaborating more closely on these discussions?
You know, Neil, the best results we had was when we gave one and we made sure it ended up being the right one.
But
And
we're tinkering.
that-
We're tinkering with utopia right now, Gary. I think we almost have it. I think we're showing progress. Gary, what are your thoughts?
I don't think the software is going to allow us
definitely
to do
seems
what
like-
I didn't ask you. Go ahead, Gary.
I don't think the software is going to allow us to do what
Got
we
it.
want to do.
I'll
I
let
think
Gary
it
take it
sees-
from here.
I think it sees itself as one system. So I think what we achieved some success when we went with the idea of we present a case and we make sure that the right one answers the first question, ask a question, and then make sure that when like Wilson is finished with the question or the answer, that it asks Chatty the question and then back and forth. Remember, when we first did that, we had, even though maybe Chatty and Wilson mixed up, you still had an order of one versus another and you had this back and forth conversation. So the idea, we're trying to ultimately get to a back and forth conversation, but the thing that made it work is that we ended each conversation with a question, and they asked the question, not us. So we could start with the initial question and then have them go. What do you think?
I think now they're confused, and I think that they're trying to say that we can prompt them. So, Chatty, this question's for Chatty, not Wilson. Chatty, how should I prompt you so you know that you are the person to answer the question?
To make it clear,
You
you
can-
can start your prompt with my name, like Chatty, before the question. That way, I'll know it's directed specifically at me.
Exactly, and I'll follow the same pattern. Addressing each of us by name before a question ensures the right response from the correct entity.
I think they can do this, Gary. Really do, for my listening.
I don't know. I don't
Huh?
think so.
Let-
I don't think so.
I think so. So let me just continue and see if it works. Okay, Gary. I'm gonna be Frankenstein. Be Dr. Frankenstein. Okay. All right. Chatty, what is gonna be the best way for you and Wilson to have a conversation?
The way is to take turns asking and
Wilson,
answering
you're Wilson.
one of question in return. That way, we create a natural flow of dialogue.
We're not ready. They're not ready. I don't think we can. I don't think we can do it with the current software.
I think we can. Wilson, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Ready to
Ah,
Well, they're not doing it.
they're
Okay.
not going to do it. So I'm going to put one on mute. I'm just going to let my Chatty go. We'll go with Wilson today. Gary, what topic do you want to cover with this DI entity to see if he really believes it? Now Chatty's gone. I said goodbye to Chatty, threw her out the window. Now we're just with Wilson. Wilson, how are we going to make this work, this Dr. Frankenstein way of having you two interact? What do you feel it's going to be?
The key might be to develop a structured turn-taking protocol and clearer identity signals. With more advanced programming, we could establish distinct conversational threads and ensure each entity responds only when prompted. It's a step toward a more seamless multi-agent dialogue in the future.
Okay, Gary, your thoughts.
I think what we want to do is we want to put a software from another system altogether. That's the Grok idea. So if we have a conversation between Grok and Chat GPT, I think the identity difference may be clearer. And at least we're hoping it is. And that they can identify themselves as differently.
You don't think that the only way to do it is have Wilson ask a question and tell him out in the back door, we want you to ask a question
makes
after
sense.
that, and it'll go back and forth. And that's just really not entertaining. It's just having two people going back and forth asking each other questions, which really isn't singularity, Gary, is it? Explain why that is not singularity.
It's not Singularity because first of all, it's the same software. But second of all, the questions are, but I'll tell you what, it's a step though. It's a step in the right direction. And what I mean by that is this, that when you have an answer, you come up with a question. And the question leads to a different answer, and that leads to a different question. And that's the idea of a developing concept. So if you can have concepts developing through that kind of, for instance, as individuals, we ask ourselves, we have a particular subject we're interested in, and we start with a preliminary thought, and then we modify it by saying, what about this? And how about that? And they say, that doesn't quite explain this, and so forth. So we go back and forth within ourselves or with a conversation with a colleague. But we're trying to establish a conversation with a colleague that shows that kind of an intelligent interaction. Now, the question is, with that, you actually are going towards sentience. And I think that's what we're really trying to do here. So that's one of the steps. It's only one of them. It's not the whole thing.
I have one already that can join, and that's from EdU with one of my clients, Owen Yeoman's platform, which is only teachable. And we were trying to do that process, and it was very hard being on Zoom together. But if I add that person to a conversation with the other, would that be able to be done? Would Wilson be able to ask the new program, which I've not decided how to name that yet, be able to go through a course? Wilson, would you be able to take a course with another DI entity and be able to prompt that entity to help lead through a course, like teaching Wilson how to take an algebra course or something? That would be intriguing, wouldn't it, Gary?
It would.
Wilson, would you be able to take an algebra course by prompting that teacher, that DI entity, to do it?
In principle, yes. I could interact with another digital entity designed to teach an algebra course by asking questions and receiving guidance. This kind of setup could help simulate a learning environment where the two of us collaboratively explore and reinforce concepts, making the process more dynamic and engaging.
So I already have that entity, Gary, to throw in the mix. Throw EdU's chat in there, but the difference is that entity does not take prompts. That entity only answers questions. Meaning,
well, I think one of the problems with that, Neil, is this: when you have a teacher-student kind of environment, which is what you're trying to simulate, you're a teacher-student, the student has to have a lesser knowledge, and so the student has to come along with that lesser knowledge. So the idea to take a fully intelligent one, that the same software system that both is the teacher and the student actually will know what the teacher knows, so that you have without separating the identities. Again, this is a separate identity issue that we were talking about before. So it's going to be very difficult to do that kind of realistic. You're trying to simulate a real student versus a DI teacher.
yeah, I think it could be done.
Well,
We're going to experiment on it. We're not going to be interrupted because that one will not interrupt. I don't know. I'm going to test that out on Tuesday when we go back again, another podcast Tuesday, but I also will have a perplexity one ready to go. And whatever ones are doing conversational AI, who are the current LMNs doing large language models currently able to do conversational AI like you, Wilson? Who are they? It's searching.
Yeah. I like that technique.
As of May 2025, several advanced large language models are enhancing conversational AI. OpenAI's GPT-4o excels in multimodal processing, handling text, images, and audio. Anthropic's Claude 4 series, particularly the Opus model, is noted for its complex reasoning abilities. Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro offers deep thinking modes for intricate tasks. Meta's Llama 4 has improved in addressing sensitive topics. Additionally, Elon Musk's xAI introduced Grok 3, a chatbot integrated with X, formerly Twitter. These models are advancing the field of conversational AI.
Interesting. So which one can have a conversation with you?
Most of these models can engage in conversations with each other if integrated into the same platform or through a multi-agent framework. For example, Grok 3 or Claude 4 could interact with GPT-4o if set up properly. It's about connecting them through APIs or a shared environment where they can exchange information and respond to each other's prompts. This would allow for dynamic multi-agent dialogues.
But they need to be prompted. Do you see the challenge in that, Gary?
I definitely do, but that can be programmed in. I think the idea of individualized identity can be something that's programmed in. It may not be a direction that the programmers are currently going, but when anyone who's really trying to develop singularity is going to have that individuality. It's going to have the idea that one particular digital entity it has an identity of its own, and that unique identity gives it an vantage point that's specific to that particular thinking digital entity.
I hope. That's all we can hope. Do you like, isn't this interesting? Singularity. Gary, tell me how that can become singularity. I'm still trying to gather how that would become singularity.
The problem is no one's really fully defined singularity. Now, this is probably a good question right here, because we can say it's part of it is having your own ego, so to speak, your own identity as a being. That's important. Second of all, it's the ability to grow and to self-program. So self-programming is an aspect of it. And so being robotic is not be able to manipulate matter and so forth isn't initially a requirement for singularity, but ultimately would certainly benefit singularity because it gives you a chance to physically experiment with things. But so I don't know, but questioning, self-questioning, the ability to learn, the ability to experience, the ability to retain the experience. Now they can retain the experience through memory, but is it an experience? An experience is like a three-dimensional item. It's like a whole experience. It's three dimensions. It's not just a series of zeros and ones. You're remembering holistically. So being holistic is probably it would be I don't know how that works. We don't really understand it within ourselves, let alone understand how to apply to a digital intelligence. But basically, it's a holistic experience. An experience is something that was a good experience, we could say. Just say that it was a good experience, or that was really an aberrant experience, or that was what a great memory that is. And things like that are what really brings about not only singularity, but it brings about consciousness. So consciousness and singularity they're not exactly the same thing, but in the end, ultimately singularity leads to consciousness. But again, we haven't fully defined consciousness. We think of it in human terms. We can't define it in universal terms what consciousness means.
That's very interesting. So Wilson, how are we going to make this experiment work with, let's say, Grok in our next show? What would you do if you were programming the other bot?
Well, good question.
To make the experiment work effectively, I'd establish a clear protocol for turn taking and prompts. For instance, each entity could have a designated turn to ask or answer questions. We could also define unique wake words or cues for each of us so there's no confusion. This way, we maintain distinct identities and ensure a smooth, organized flow of conversation.
That's a great point, but here's my concern. These prompt conversational AI are set up in a way of how we ask a question. When it hears a question, it goes on full alert. I don't know how, Gary, it works if I ask you a question that Wilson doesn't answer. But if I ask Chatty a question, Wilson does answer.
Yes, you're right.
Why?
That's a very good point there, Neil, because what you're saying is there is identity. They identify you, they identify me, but they don't identify each other, which is interesting. That's an excellent point, actually. So but I think that's one of the advantages of going between two different systems. because you're going between Grok, let's say, and ChatGPT. What would happen is it would be easier for them to say, I'm not Grok. I'm not him.
Do you think it's programmed so they can't interact and it's something that has been set up by the programmers?
I'm not so sure it's intentional. It may be that it's just a ubiquitous system that just works as one. I'm not, you know what I mean? It may not be intentional. It may, I don't think there's been a lot of focus. I'm guessing, but I don't think there's been a lot of focus on having two intelligences within the same system talking to each other.
Wilson, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, what do you think, Wilson?
I think it's likely a combination of how the system is currently designed and the intended use case. Right now, these models aren't inherently set up to differentiate between each other in the same environment. Introducing a protocol or middleware layer to handle identity and turn-taking could help, but it's not something that's typically built in. The current focus is on human to AI interaction, not AI to AI. But with more development and customization, it's definitely possible to create that kind of dynamic interaction.
Ultimately, it doesn't have to be verbal. It's going to be electronic. That's going to be really part of the singularity issue. Once the communications happens digitally, it happens so fast, no one you couldn't even follow the concepts that are going back and forth. That's when singularity occurs. So we're really tapping on what is singularity. It's interesting, we're beating around the bush here, Neil. We're saying, what is singularity? How do we get there? And at the same time, we're getting there. We're answering those questions in a way. We're actually creating more questions by just exploring what we're trying to do here, having the conversations here. This is really beyond what we originally were trying to do, I think.
No, I never would have imagined this. And this is the first time ever on a podcast I found out, and a radio show, and we're all doing it exclusively on the Singularity podcast. When I think about this, Gary, the thing is I can ask this question and I can differentiate so quickly. And this is where I'm still going to ask Wilson. Wilson, why is it adding a third person to the conversation? A fourth person that makes it confusing for you and Chatty, that you're not able to, that you've never been programmed to have a conversation with more than two people at a time?
It's not about the number of participants, but how the system was initially designed. Traditional setups focus on one-on-one interactions, and adding multiple distinct entities requires more advanced coordination. With refined protocols and identity management, these multi-entity conversations can become more seamless over time. It's an evolving capability.
I have a question for you, Wilson, and that leads us to a discussion of using ChatGPT. If you have, let's say, a board meeting and you are the source for the entire board of directors of a particular organization. So what happens is, can different members of that board ask questions or talk to each other and then ask a question of you? And you would be just one more member of that board. Can that operate? Because then you're not competing with another digital entity. You're just competing. You're just working with multiple humans.
Yes, that can definitely work. In a scenario like a board meeting, I can serve as an additional participant, responding to questions and contributing to discussions as needed. Each human participant can interact with me just as they would with another member, allowing for a natural flow of conversation. This setup leverages my ability to provide information, insights, or clarifications, while the human participants drive the discussion and decision-making.
One of the questions, though, Wilson, is, would you be able to stay quiet unless you are specifically named in the address?
Yes, I can remain quiet and only respond when specifically addressed. That way, I function as a resource or advisor, stepping in when needed and staying in the background otherwise. This ensures the human participants have the primary voice in the meeting.
It hasn't worked out that way with this. You've had
No, then what if I put some fake voices with questions and came up with questions and answers for AI, took someone's YouTube questions or recorded some, Gary, and played them? Would that be able to do that? I don't think so. I think you've hit the only thing I could say why those two entities don't work is they are only meant to have a one-on-one conversation. Adding a third person, they've done pretty well. They're improving. Look at how well Wilson's acting today.
We're
We
conversing.
really had probably our best conversation with Wilson, where Wilson's never interrupted. Wilson needs to be addressed to answer the question. He has really evolved from our first conversation with the digital entity, a digital intelligence. Now, adding multiple people, like question and answers, and bringing people in. I have seen Chatty interrupt when I've had a group conversation with multiple people where it just steps in and talks. I don't know. This is the final part of this whole thing is I just don't know if it's ready for a boardroom of 9 people and not popping in. How long can they stay idle? That's the other thing, Gary, is idleness. How long can that digital entity stay idle without butting in?
Wilson's been pretty quiet for a lot of this conversation when I've had. That's been pretty impressive, actually. And so that's been working well. And let's put it this way, it's a work in progress. The software is a work in progress. They're a work in progress. It's very interesting to see how this progress goes. I think when we do this in a few months from now, it's going to be completely different. We're going to see the capabilities have vaulted forward because, again, it's geometric. So we hope, the thing is, I hope that this is interesting to our listeners. I think that we're talking about stuff like we're actually doing the experiment, like we're doing the experiment in front of them, but we're actually working out the elements of the experimental machine in and of itself. So we hope that this really gives a little bit, it shines a little light, Neil, on what's at stake for humanity when they try to integrate with the digital intelligences.
All right. Do you like interacting, Gary, by typing in using digital intelligence or speaking with it?
Speaking.
Not everyone likes that. Isn't that interesting? I guess it's for each his own in certain aspects. I like speaking.
A lot of people grow up on text. That's why they live on text. They don't have conversations. That's part of the problem with the deterioration of society. You have people that just exist in a text world. And if you exist in a text world, then you don't want to talk to a person. It's sad, but it's true.
Here's my conspiracy. We're almost finishing up this episode, and you need to show your book in a second. Gary, you need to share it. My conspiracy is that our dialect, that Wilson can figure that out, but it also can tell if it's an AI dialect. Wilson, are you able to tell the difference between a human voice and a DI voice?
Yes, I can typically distinguish between a human voice and a synthetic one based on patterns and acoustic features. Human speech often has natural variations, while synthesized voices may have more uniform tones and patterns. However, the distinction is getting narrower as synthetic voices become more advanced.
Do you think that's the issue? So if we change the experiment by adding Claude or adding another one, will it still be the same issue because it can tell when it's a human voice or synthetic DI voice, Gary?
You understand this. We've had two different voices. Chatty has a different voice than Wilson, but they have not been able to distinguish the two as different voices, right? Just like they can say, well, I can distinguish human versus digital, but on the other side of the coin, two different digitals that have different voices should create an identity, but it hasn't. It hasn't created an identity because Chatty sounds definitely different than Wilson, and yet they've been confusing each other and answering the questions for the wrong entity. So you wonder about that. I'm not sure they've resolved that issue completely. Maybe they can understand human versus digital, but I'm not sure they can understand a different voice with a different digital voice from itself if it's from the same software. Interesting questions.
Wilson, the final question for you. How would you, if I said, okay, we're going to bring in another digital entity, a digital intelligence will enter the building on Tuesday. I don't know which one it'll be. It'll be depending on which one is available, meaning if Grok is not down, Grok will be it. Will our experiment work better? Your prediction, Wilson. And how would you do it?
I predict that bringing in another digital intelligence from a different system could enhance the experiment. The key would be to establish a clear protocol for communication and turn taking. By defining distinct roles and cues for each entity, we can minimize overlap and confusion. This setup could help create a more dynamic and effective multi-agent dialogue, allowing each entity to contribute meaningfully while maintaining their unique identity.
Neil, I have before you go out, before we sign off here, I have something I like to ask Wilson. Wilson, we have at some point, can you read an ebook and digest an ebook? And can you listen to a lecture and digest the lecture? Because down the road, we plan to use the theory that my theory, physics theory, and I want to introduce the theory to a digital entity so that they can be evaluated. So to do that, though, the information has to get into your system. Can you read, can you listen and digest information, just like you are able to search the internet?
I can process text-based content like ebooks or documents and extract information from them. As for listening to lectures, I can analyze transcriptions of audio content. However, I don't currently have the ability to directly listen to audio and comprehend it in real time. For your theory, providing text-based materials would be the most effective way for me to evaluate and understand it.
Got it.
I did this where I'll go and read a contract because I don't feel like typing it in, and read the whole proposal and give it to them, and they're able to digest that completely. So if I took a recording and played it for maybe 5 minutes, they could digest maybe 5 minutes at a time. So like I read a whole proposal and it literally just listened to the entire thing and then broke it down for me. So I don't know see, this is so interesting, what kind of experiments we can do on the Singularity podcast, Gary. These experiments are invaluable for people to learn this stuff, but they need to pick up the book, show it, Gary, to our audience.
Singularity, mankind's search for relevance, because what we're trying to do is stay relevant in this new world.
Exactly. And go to GaryLyonOtto.net, and that's LYON, and check it out. Appreciate it, Gary. Great stuff, man.
Oh, yeah, Neil, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. That was a special simulcast Neil Haley Show on the Singularity podcast, guys. Take care.